Welcome back, everyone. I am your host, JC Lang, and this is episode 9 of Bright Lights and Scary Shadows The Night Watch, a history of police in America. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the beginnings of the police. And then after that, we're going to take a look at how the police have morphed into what they are today. This episode ended up becoming a 2-part series only because the evolution of the Thin Blue Line from a simple night watch to a militarized police force is one that most people don't really know. Beyond that, the truth of the whole thing might actually really blow your fucking mind. So it ended up being a little longer than I wanted it to be, so we do a part 1 today, and then we're going to hit you with a part 2 next week, alright? But I promise you it is worth it, and the information inside is worthy of your time and attention. But first, before we get into the episode, let's get into some updates.
Today's updates.
Alright, so my home setup has been constantly changing, and my equipment was in need of some serious updating, and I finally was able to get a new interface and upgraded some other odds and ends, and I couldn't be happier. The hope here is that everything sounds better for you guys, and editing on my end becomes much quicker, so we can be more consistent with the show. That's the hope, but as things kind of came into fruition, even with this episode, I tend to get caught up in trying to learn about what I'm presenting, more so than just trying to regurgitate you a lot of the information. And sometimes with things, if I find a thread that I didn't really know or something that we didn't really know, I'll end up pulling on that thread to see where it goes. And in terms of making the show, it kind of makes things kind of drawn out sometimes when I have to write it, because I have ADD, and so the more I read and the more I'm going into things, like I'm just imagining the fucking situations like over and over in my head, and I'm off in La La Land, and before I know it, I've wasted a half an hour fucking thinking about slave labor, or the origins of racism and manufactured racism and all this fucking shit, and I just sit in my head dreaming about it instead of fucking touching the keyboards. It's the most frustrating fucking thing. For all you people out there that don't have ADHD, fucking count your blessings. And if you just have trouble focusing, fucking shit, man, I hear you. I feel your pain on it. It sucks. And especially when you have things that trigger imagination. It really sets it off, and simple things can take fucking so long, and I'm getting all fucking distracted, right? But so here we are, the new update is set up, everything should be better, should be cleaner, should be awesomer, but we won't know until we get a few things out, right? So now, there was a time period where I had an injury, and I suffered through it for years. I had to get surgeries, everything, and therapy didn't help. They tried to push pills on me. I didn't want the pills. I just wanted to talk to somebody about the shit was going on, and I hit like a ton of dead ends. And it wasn't until I started playing Destiny on Xbox, and I made a whole bunch of friends on Xbox, and a few of them became very good, like dear friends, life friends now. And one of them I got to go and actually meet during our cross-country trip. And it's kind of funny, right? Like, I don't even know this dude. We just met on Xbox. But been talking, like, I know his wife, he knows my wife, like, it's, you wouldn't think that we met on Xbox, but I got to bring my family to go meet his family in Chicago during our cross-country trip, and it was fucking awesome. He's such a good guy. His wife is fucking such an awesome woman. They treated us to dinner from Luminati's out there in Chicago, which is fucking amazing if you're ever out there in the area and you can try it. And it was such a good night, and they were so kind to us to open up their home to us. And I forgot to give them a very specific shout out last episode. And so George, Izzy, fucking love you guys. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for always being there. And, you guys are huge. So now, moving on, right? The next update, the last update, and probably the most importantest update of all updates up to this point. This episode is sponsored by Dazed and Infused Baking Company. Dazed and Infused Baking Co. is one of my most favoriteest fucking companies right now. They make the best edibles I have ever had, right? Candy rope, brownie bombs, cookies, oatmeal bars, pineapple upside down cake are just a few of the delicious and delectable THC-infused delicacies they have on offer. And if I'm being honest with you guys, I had a custom crossfaded Jello shot before I started recording, so I don't know how wacky we're gonna get today. I hope this isn't too off track. I hope I don't get too fired up and too distracted. But man, dude, guys, honestly, fucking love these dudes. Check them out at Dazed Treats. Give them a like, give them a follow, and make sure you stay on top of them. Now, aside from the Jello shots, my personal favorite is the brownie bomb. But I have heard some wild things about the pineapple upside down cake, just so you know. And I will let you guys know how these crossfaded Jello shots work out by the end of the episode. But dude, these guys are great. And if you can, head over and follow them on Facebook at Dazed Treats. And on Instagram, it is at Dazed and Infused Baking, all one word. And the fine purveyors over there at Dazed and Infused have graced us with a 90 milligram tin of their Fruity Pebble Metabuds. Dude, these things are amazing. And if you head over to their Facebook or Instagram, you can see what they are and you can start to get excited. By far, one of my most favorite things that they make. Honestly, so much of it is my favorite because I fucking love this shit. And because I've always smoked, I've always been in trouble with the law. And we're going to get into that. But that's why I wanted to bring you this giveaway for this episode, because fuck the cops when it comes to this shit. Fuck the reason why it was illegal to begin with, which is going to be a whole episode. So today we are going to give you guys a chance of winning a 90 milligram tin of their Fruity Pebble Metabuds. And I know for a fact that you will love them. This is 18 plus, so make sure you are 18 plus, and you're going to have to hang out to the end of the show in order to figure out how to win. And that is the end of today's updates. Now, it would be a lie to say that this episode wasn't brought on by recent events. With everything that's been going on in this country recently, a lot of information has been flung around, and the police are right smack dab in the middle of it. And I think everyone should really truly know about our nation's police force. With that in mind, today is going to be a great episode, and I hope that everyone learns as much as I did recording it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you our next chapter, Episode 9, The Night Watch, a history of police in America. The story of the police in America is most certainly a tricky one. Throughout my own life, I've had a love-hate relationship with the police, and coming from the city where the median income has always been well below the poverty line, the police have been a constant part of my life. And I mean, not for nothing, but I was a mischievous kid, but still though, the system behaves in a way that once you have a record, you become a target. And let me tell you, thank God weed is legal, because if I told you how many times I was arrested for marijuana, you probably wouldn't believe me. So if I got pulled over at any point in time when I was younger, I was getting searched regardless, which led to a cycle of about 10 years that I absolutely could not get my life off the ground. It's also what makes today's giveaway contest so poignant. Here we are with marijuana being legal in a lot of states, and here we are with this giveaway contest from Dazed and Infused Baking Company for y'all to enjoy and get fucking high with me, because fuck all that shit. You feel me? Let's keep it going. All the trouble that I got into, it doesn't change the fact that when I was a young boy, and even as I got older, I still wanted to be a police officer, you know, and it's not hard to see why we would all want to be a police officer as children. Every example we have of them is of some sort of hero, you know? They come to our schools and they talk about how they protect us on career day. They're all over our TV shows and movies as the people who save the fucking day, right? And they're the ones that the people call when there is a problem. But even beyond the whole idea of fighting the bad people, law and justice always being right was programmed into us right from birth. Today there are shows like Paw Patrol, which has recently come under fire, but back in my day, we had cartoons about fighting injustice hand over fist. We had Mask, we had Cops, we had Brave Star, Silverhawk, G.I. Joe, the Centaurians, Jason the Wheeled Warriors, and so many more. And as I grew up, there was shit like SWAT Cats, Power Rangers, and fucking Captain Planet. And that's just the cartoons that I watched. You know, never mind all the movies and the TV shows that the adults would watch that we would sit in on as children. TV shows like Matlock, Cagney and Lacey, Dragnet, Kojak, Starsky and Hutch, The Andy Griffith Show, The Lone Ranger, Columbo, Magnum PI, and Beretta. Beretta did that shit. We can't forget to throw Crockett and Tubbs, Knight Rider, 21 Jump Street, and The Equalizer in that mix too. Shit, even Hawaii Five-0, right? And then we have all kinds of movies like Dirty Harry, Shaft, Cobra, Death Wish, Tango and Cash, Lethal Weapon, Dragnet the movie, and so many others, right? And all of these shows and movies portrayed the police and law and order as the heroes that, regardless of what they did, were always right. So it's easy to see why any of us would want to grow up and be a police officer when we're confronted with so many shining examples of their heroics and honor, right? Make no mistake, this is totally by design too, because starting in the 40s, Hollywood began telling the story of the brave men in blue, and by the 60s and 70s, they kicked that shit into high gear with all the shows that we already went over, as well as many books and comics. Now, after the civil rights movement, the police needed to be seen as the good guys above all else. They needed the people to admire them, and so they turned to Hollywood to let the magic unfold, right? And now by the 80s, there are all kinds of cool cop shows, movies, cartoons, and they were always the good guys. As an 80s baby, I grew up wanting to be like a super ninja policeman, and I would watch all these shows and movies, and I'd have a bandana on my head and a fucking gun in my hand, screaming, "Hi-ya!" like, while I fucking jumped off of furniture like a fucking fool, you know? And I'm sure I'm not alone in this either, right? We all played cops and robbers. We all played Manhunt and shit like that growing up. If you haven't, you're missing out. I don't give a fuck how old you are. Get some friends together, get a whole bunch of people together, and go play Manhunt in like the woods or the dunes, or fucking play kick the can. You know, do something childlike. If you haven't done any of this shit, man, get a bunch of kids and fucking, you know, play these games, dude, because you missed out. And I'm sorry for you. But you can fix it. It's not over. It's not too late at all. I believe in you. To protect and serve is their motto. And when you grow up watching these superheroes, why the fuck wouldn't you want to be a cop, right? On the outside looking in, it looks glorious as fuck. High-speed chases, running down a perp, saving a lady from an attacker, you know, stopping a hostage situation. That all sounds super badass, and that's how we grow up. We grow up believing in a clearly drawn line in the sand, and on one side, there are good people, and on the other side, there are bad apples. Law and order was always the hero. We believe that. We grow up believing that the boys and girls in blue are the good guys, and they're on the front lines battling corruption and overall chicanery. We believe that they are the flashlight that keeps the boogeyman away. We grow up thinking that once we become cops, we will stop all of the injustice that we see, only to find out that our idea of what it meant to be a police officer is not at all what we thought it was going to be. Now, granted, that's not everyone. Some people are sociopaths, some people are fucking narcissists, and some people are just plain old power hungry, and for them, the only reason to join the force is to fuck with you, and these people are now what we call bad apples. You know, and for the other part of the officers, they're confronted with a massive fucking culture shock that is met with a blue wall of silence. All of it fucks their heads. The entire system is, in fact, nothing like we think it to be, and believe me, we're gonna get into that. Now, by the time the 90s rolled around, America got a fucking real good look at something the black community had been complaining about for years, which was vicious and extreme use of force. On March 3rd, 1991, that shit was on full display as George Holliday recorded from his apartment window. For 12 fucking minutes, the LAPD beat the shit out of Rodney King after a car chase, hitting him over and over with their clubs and fucking shooting him with tasers, and I can honestly say to you that I'm shocked he fucking survived this beating. Rodney King was 25 years old at the time that this happened, and I gotta be honest, I didn't remember much about this aside from the images from the video of them opening a fucking can of whoop ass on this poor kid. You know, I was only 9 when it happened, but I remember watching it on the TV and how I stood there fucking wide-eyed and in vapor lock as my whole worldview changed in that instant. The cops were hitting Rodney so much they had to switch to their non-fucking dominant hands. And then they had to use both hands because of their own sheer fucking exhaustion of hitting him 56 fucking times with batons. The story behind the Rodney King incident and the story of Rodney King himself is very, very sad any which way you split it. And even before the Rodney King incident, community leaders in Los Angeles had repeatedly complained about harassment and excessive use of force by the LAPD. And now here we all are watching this play out on national TV news and seeing it on the fucking cover of Newsweek. Finally, everyone could see what they were talking about. Community leaders across this great nation thought for fucking sure this was going to bring about the change that they had been screaming about for years, you know? But they were wrong. We were all wrong. And instead, on April 29, 1992, a jury acquitted Stacey Koon, Lawrence Powell, Timothy Wind, Theodore Briseno, and Ronaldo Solano of the LAPD for the usage of excessive force. These men surrounded King, tasered him, struck him dozens of times with side-handed batons, kicked him, stomped him in his back, and tackled him to the ground before fucking handcuffing him and hog-tying his legs. And they were fucking acquitted. From that, we saw the LA riots, or the LA uprising, and for 6 days, LA turned into a fucking war zone, where widespread looting, fires, and violence took over the fucking streets. I'm sure we all remember the video and the images of that poor truck driver that got fucked up in the middle of the street. By the time it was over, 63 people had been killed, 2,383 people had been injured, and more than 12,000 had been arrested, and there were estimates of property damage over $1 billion, much of which only happened in Koreatown, where most of the rioting occurred. And the reason why a lot of it happened out there was because of race tensions between Asians and blacks, because if you guys don't know, Asian people are extremely racist towards black people. That's why Koreatown was the focus of the LA uprising, because there was just a lot of beef in between the black community and the Korean community. Now, the only reason the upheaval ended was because the government rolled in fucking the Guard and Marines and all kinds of other law enforcement organizations and fucking threw them out into the streets, you know? And this may not have brought about the change that everyone was looking for, but it was a major catalyst nonetheless. You know, while it didn't change police brutality, it did change the narrative, which is one that by the time was already in the process of its evolution. You know, it mainly started with rap, where you see groups like fucking Public Enemy rise to prominence in 85, and then NWA released Fuck the Police in 88, and by the 90s, hip-hop was sweeping the nation and the world, and in the music, police harassment and brutality was a main fucking focal point, you know? And this started to seep into Hollywood too, and by the time Rodney King happens, the whole perspective has been turned on its fucking head. Prior to the 90s, to classist, racist white people, police brutality was nothing more than an urban myth spread by those ungrateful Negroes. You know? Just take a look at this clip that we found.
Unbelievable. After all we've done for them. Hello, Captain Lynch. This is Dick Whiteman. I was reading a very offensive article, and I demand you teach these ungrateful Negroes a lesson.
The rose-colored glasses American society was looking through when it came to civil rights and police brutality was shattered after Rodney King. And prior to the late 80s, early 90s, the only big-time movie that portrayed police corruption was Serpico with Pacino back in 73. You know, but once the 90s hit, movies changed. Now they were all about reality as opposed to fluffed-up dramatics. You know, right out of the gate, we get Internal Affairs, Blue Steel, Deep Cover, and The Last Boy Scout, you know? And as the decade progressed, our movies and music only chronicled more and more of this brutality and corruption with movies like Street Kings, Training Day, and The Departed. And we can't forget songs like KRS-One's Sound of the Police and Rage Against the Machine's Killing in the Name of. This list is crazy extensive when you look at it all, and I could spend this whole show telling you all the names of the movies, shows, cartoons, books, comics, graphic novels, songs, psalms, and poems that are dedicated to shining a light on the abusive, oppressive, and racist behavior of the police force. Now, after the Rodney King incident, you would think that things would have gotten better, and instead it was the exact inverse. They got worse. A lot worse. Or at least that's how it was seen. Maybe it was and is the advancements of technology and the proliferation of camera phones, you know? I mean, back in the day, shit wasn't as easy as a button combination on your fucking phone, you know? Fuck, I remember the first video camera that we got, you know, and it was like every time you wanted to catch a moment, Channel 5 News was in your goddamn living room because that's how massive these fucking things were. You know, you had to like lift it up and put it on your shoulder. Shit was crazy. You know, nowadays, a video camera is a thing of the fucking past and camera phones rule the day. With that, though, we have seen a massive uptick in videos of police brutality or outright murder being committed by the police. And the question is always asked in regards to this. Is it really getting worse, or are we just seeing more of it due to the proliferation of camera phones? And either way you split it, I don't think it really fucking matters, because the fact of the matter is that it shouldn't be happening at all. And even still to this day, I struggle with the fact that the force operates the way that it does. But as with most things in this world, I learned a long time ago that nothing, and I fucking mean nothing, is what you think it is. It doesn't matter what it is. None of it is what you think it is. I had my eyes slapped open in my 20s, and it's been a constant stream of shattering the grand illusion ever fucking since. The police were the good guys, right up until they weren't, and they never got better. After King and the LA uprising, we had numerous other riots due to excessive force, and we're going to get into things more after the break, but let's look at all the recent protests that have sparked due to cops gunning people down on the street. And we're just going to look at the police ones. We're not going to look at things like Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon Martin and shit like that. We're just going to look at the ones that involve direct police, violence, We start off with Amadou Diallo, right? On February 4th, 1999, 4 plainclothes officers shot 23-year-old Amadou Diallo near his home. They fired 41 fucking shots thinking that he had a gun when he was just reaching for his wallet. The cops were acquitted on all charges, and it set off a fucking round of protests. Diallo wasn't from this country, didn't understand the language that good. He wasn't a bad dude. He was coming out here to get a computer science degree. And he came from a very wealthy family as well. And he didn't want any of the help. He didn't want any of the money. He wanted to do this all on his own. And he was nervous, couldn't get into his house one day, and then the cops fucking rolled up on him, and, he tries to pull out his wallet to get his ID, and they just fucking light him up. And the whole story about this one is crazy, and I had to cut out a lot of it because I got into a whole tangent in the whole situation. But I would say definitely look up how this whole scenario played out, and it's going to make you fucking shake your head, Now, on November 25th in 2006, Sean Bell and his friends were gunned down outside of a strip club when they were rolled up on by plainclothes police. In an attempt to get away from the bunch of white men, Sean crashed, and presumably because he was drinking, they were at a fucking strip club, bachelor party, whatever, but the police response to this was to fire 51 fucking shots at Sean Bean and his 2 friends, Joseph Guzman and Trent Benefield. It killed Sean instantly with 2 shots, critically injured Joseph with 11 shots, and they tagged Trent with 3. The fucking cops were supposedly looking for a gun trafficker, but every part of their story is bullshit. It is all fucking bullshit. And at the end of the night, Sean, the night before his wedding, was dead, and his friends shot over a dozen times. And again, the police were tried and acquitted on all fucking charges, and again, the streets erupted. It is bullshit, dude. And it keeps going, right? So next, in St. Louis, 24-year-old Anthony Lamar Smith was shot and killed after a police chase on December 20th, 2011. Smith did not need to fucking die at all. Charges weren't even brought against fucking Officer Stockley until 5 goddamn years later when the police video of the chase surfaced. Officer Jason Fuckface Stockley was heard in the video saying he's gonna kill this motherfucker, don't you know it? Everything about Smith's death is a mess. And now this has nothing to do with whether or not Smith was a good man or not. He was a drug dealer and he just bought a bag of heroin. You know what I mean? But that doesn't clear Stockley of anything that he fucking did. Stockley made the decision to kill Smith before they even got to him. And if you watch the video, you can clearly hear Officer Schutz over there say he's going to kill Smith. And after they stop him, you can clearly see Stockley's partner lean in after scanning around, and it looks like he says, "Do it now." And it looks like if you watch it, I swear to God, his head, everything, like he leans in and he's like, "Do it now." And then it's at that point that Stockley pulls his gun, shoots Lamar fucking 5 times, and his partner instantly and super nonchalantly just picks up his radio and radios in the shooting as if nothing really even fucking happened. And then afterwards, multiple cops show up and they pull out the now deceased Smith from his car, and Stockley goes back to the police SUV and grabs stuff out of his bag and makes sure to hide it from the police SUV camera. And it's at that point that Stockley returns to and strangely enters Smith's car and does what very much seems like planting a gun. After Stockley's acquittal for first-degree murder in 2017, the streets once again blew the fuck up. Like, there is no way this dude should have been acquitted from this shit. Like, he made the decision. It was premeditated. It was clearly premeditated, So now, 3 years after Anthony Lamar Smith's killing in 2011, we head over to New York on July 24th of 2014. 2 undercover cops stop and begin to harass the late Eric Garner, accusing him of selling loose cigarettes. Even though they didn't see Garner do anything wrong, they try to arrest him anyway, right? And there's a lot to Garner's backstory, but more importantly, whatever his past was or current transgressions were, the police had a habit of harassing the 45-year-old Eric Garner, and to which it seems he had had enough of that day. Former Officer Pantaleo jumps on Garner's back and puts him in a chokehold and slams him on the fucking ground. And that's when Eric starts to say, I can't breathe, and he 100% sounds like he's having a fucking problem breathing. Eric Garner said 11 times, I can't breathe, and they shoved his fucking head into the pavement for it. Shortly after being pinned on the ground, Eric Garner lost consciousness and died on the fucking street. The autopsy concluded that the cause of death was homicide, citing that the types of injuries Garner suffered as being consistent with that of a homicide. Protests erupted once again after the jury's decision to not indict former Officer Pantaleo, and they lasted for several days, and Pantaleo wasn't fired from the fucking force until 2019 when a separate trial was held against him led by the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Like, it's fucked up. Like, these dudes can do whatever they want and they just get away with it. Like, and this one was clear as day. Clear as fucking day. Now, after this, we head over to Ferguson, Missouri on August 29th of 2014. And this one I struggle with, right? And I don't want to piss anybody off or whatever, so whatever, let's just get into it, right? 18-year-old Michael Brown is gunned down after an altercation with an officer who was responding to Brown's theft of cigarillos from a local convenience store, right? And now this one is tough because witness accounts corroborate Officer Wilson's testimony. Furthermore, the crime scene is consistent with the reports given by the officer, and even a 74-year-old black man who was a witness said that that cop was in the right and he did what he had to do. But none of that really mattered though, because in the public's eye, it was just another black man taken in the prime of his life. And now look, I can make my attritions here as a formal troublemaker, and I can be super fucking objective in some of these cases, right? But the late Michael Brown is one that is really hard to stick up for. It seems like this kid did everything wrong, and I don't care about the system in some places. Sometimes we gotta chalk some shit up to bad decisions, and in Brown's case, it seems like there were a lot of those decisions that ended his life way too early. And it was also this situation that set up the Black Lives Movement throughout the country. And just as before, protests broke out, but this time it was different. This time they were followed by riots, because as this keeps happening, the protests keep getting worse, bigger, more aggressive, more angry. Now, this one was fucking hard, man. This one was tough. Like, and watching this one, you know, really sucked. You know, I think watching all of them really sucked. I think for 2 days, I just watched all these people get murdered over and over again, you know, and I was struggling for a couple days with this because it just broke my fucking heart to watch all of this shit happen. And then the realization that we live in a society where we can just pull up murder and watch murder right in front of our eyes, you know, for fun. You know, not that this was fucking for fun, but, you know, if I wanted to, just to see somebody get murdered, I could just pull some shit up. And I know this is nothing new because I remember back in the day when we had Faces of Death, you know, and banned from TV and all those crazy videos of people being hit by fucking trains and their body exploding and shit like that. Or you know, the soldiers fucking shooting people in the head, execution style. And so whatever, I mean, we all had that shit growing up, but nothing like it is today. Nothing like it is now where you can just go on YouTube or just search man being murdered and you'll get multiple videos of it. You know, it's fucking nuts. And it added to this whole dynamic of me trying to write this episode because it's like, fuck, you know, I start to analyze us as a society and it's just hard, man. It's fucking hard. Like I was saying before with this ADD shit, man, my brain goes all over the fucking place and I want to start picking apart all different kinds of things and I never stay on topic like I'm not doing right fucking now. But, so, Freddie Gray, right? This shit was fucked up. In April 2015, 25-year-old Freddie Gray is arrested in Baltimore, Maryland for carrying a knife. Now, the way that the police told the story was that they just put Freddie in the back of the paddy wagon with his hands and his feet shackled and then gave him what was known as a rough ride. A rough ride is when you have someone in the back of a police van and you do not buckle them into the police van. So they're just in there. And so you leave them shackled and unbound to the vehicle and you proceed to drive like a fucking asshole. And this was a practice that they do all over the place. And it was something that they were trying to put a stop to in Baltimore because of injuries. And they had just revised the seatbelt policy 6 days prior to Gray's death. The officers involved directly ignored this policy change and decided to give him a rough ride on purpose on top of what they actually did. And it was probably because of them being recorded. When the van finally stopped and they opened the doors, Freddie Gray repeatedly asked for a medic before falling unconscious. Freddie suffered multiple injuries, most notably to his spine, and he died a week later. And if you watch the video, you can see that they clearly hurt Freddie before he even got into the van. He could barely use his legs and he kept screaming every time they tried to move him. Witnesses on the scene say that they had poor Freddie fucking folded like a chair at one point, and they had knees on his neck and his back after shooting him multiple times with a taser. Once again, medical examiners declare the death as a homicide, and Baltimore lights the fuck up. And as these protests continue, as I said before, they continue to grow and they become more impetuous and violent. And once again, on top of it, all officers involved got away without being charged of committing any fucking crimes. This is bullshit. And it continues. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on July 5th, 2016, 37-year-old Alton Sterling was shot dead outside a convenience store. Sterling was selling bootleg CDs and DVDs outside of Triple S, where he normally did when the police got a call about him brandishing a gun. When the police arrived, he was in the middle of packing up the last of his stuff and getting ready to go home for the night. And Alton had supposedly just bought the gun that he was carrying because kids were jacking people like him that sold CDs and DVDs in the area. Supposedly, the way the story goes is he pulls out his gun when a shady ass homeless dude starts asking him for money, and he's telling the dude to, back the fuck off. You know what I'm saying? Like, get the fuck away from me, get out of here. The dude's keeps pushing, and so finally he pulls the gun and says, get the fuck out, right? So the homeless dude goes and calls the cops on him, and that's what leads the cops to show up, right? Now, within minutes of officers Lake and Salamoni arriving on the scene, Alton Sterling was dead. Fucking minutes, dude. It didn't take long for this to happen at all, right? And not once did the cops tell him why they were questioning him. Not once did they exhibit any signs that they even thought he had a gun. And within moments of that dude Salamoni arriving on the scene, he starts threatening to shoot Alton Sterling in his fucking face. And then about 90 seconds later, that's what happens. Now, this was another one that was tough because I gotta be honest, I really wonder what would have happened in this situation if Sterling had just complied with the police. He was clearly freaking out. He clearly just wanted to go home, and you can see it in his face and you can hear it in his voice. But he never got that chance, and honestly, it was because he never really complied, or at least that's what it seems like. Sterling was in fact carrying a gun, and after they seen the gun, he never stopped moving. That's all he had to do was just stop moving. And the way that they were on the ground, they could not get control of his right arm where his gun was in the right pocket. And the officer screams, don't fucking move, don't fucking move. And he does, and he ends up being shot 6 times. I am not excusing this behavior at all. He did not need to die, but there was a lot in this situation when you look at it, it's like this could have went a different way. Or at least you'd want to hope that it could have gone a different way. But it didn't. And now Alton's dead. And once again, the fucking cops walk. And once again, the streets erupt. And only this time, they are quickly met with a heavily militarized police force. Now, the very fucking next day after Alton Sterling's death, Philando Castile gets clapped the fuck up by the cops. And this is another one of those situations where it's like it probably could have gone a whole different way, but still it does not excuse the cops' behavior. But if you watch the video, there was some clear miscommunication in the car, Maybe the cop just wanted to shoot, I don't know. But it seems like it could have gone a different way if there was more thought and care from both parties involved. The cop as well as Philando. But unfortunately, hindsight is 2020. And unfortunately, Philando was gone. On July 6th of 2016, 32-year-old Philando Castile, his girlfriend and their daughter were stopped for a busted taillight by Officer Geronimo Yanez. And after a friendly exchange, Castile alerts Officer Yanez that he's carrying a gun. And that he's licensed and all that. And now Officer Yanez says, don't reach for it. And he's like, I'm not going to reach for it. And as he goes to say, I'm just going to grab my license, like he's trying to reach for his wallet to grab his license. But Officer Yanez starts to freak out because he thinks he's reaching for the gun. He says, don't do it. And he just fucking pops him up 4 fucking times right there in front of the daughter, in front of the girlfriend. It was fucking nuts. Philando's girlfriend Diamond Reynolds live streamed the aftermath, showing the dead Castile with a shattered arm and Officer Yanez screaming that he said not to reach for his gun. Yanez was clearly panicking in the situation. He was clearly freaked out. He was clearly tripping out that he just fucking killed this dude. And all he could do was just scream, I told him not to do it. But that doesn't change the fact that he shot, first. He didn't need to, but he did it anyway. And now Philando is dead. And Philando is one that, really should have been fucking held on to because this one was so fucked up. You see the little girl come running out of the back of the car, and the reason why she gets out of the car and runs out of the back of the car is because Philando goes fucking lumps over backwards, and he's just looking at her dead. She's looking at him, I guess probably the better way to say it, looking directly back at her, but he's dead. And this poor little girl had to see this whole situation happen. And she jumps out of the car and runs into the other cop. Arms that is there, or the other cop snatches her up, however you want to look at that. I didn't really watch it that much because that side of the screen that much because I was so busy just being blown the fuck away with what had just happened to Philando. And the way that Diamond held her shit together, live streaming while this cop was fucking screaming at her, and she's just like, please God, don't let this be what the fuck just happened. Please tell me that this cop didn't just kill my boyfriend. But that's exactly what happened, and it was fucking crazy to see. And I watched it too many times because it was just so shocking. Like, how the fuck did it just go from a friendly exchange to pop, and now he's dead? And the more fucked up part is that even though the video was enough to fire up the country and clearly show his excessive use of force, it wasn't enough to convict Officer Yanez of murder. And he was found not guilty of any wrongdoing at fucking all. Right after the shooting, violent protests erupted, and then they erupted once again after Officer Geronimo Yanez was acquitted of all charges. This one was fucking terrible to see somebody walk away from. You can go through all of these and you can kind of make some judgment calls on a few of them, but some of them it's just inexcusable, dude. This is fucking inexcusable that these cops walked. It's inexcusable. And it creates a massive feeling of distrust and discomfort. You know, I feel it. I mean, granted, I've been in and out of trouble with the cops forever, so I have reasons for feeling this way, but also I grew up in a very poor area. And so I see this shit. The cops do not fucking give a fuck, man. It's crazy nowadays. You know, and there's even a story that happened in my own city that I'm going to get to later. Or it's probably going to come out in part 2, not in this episode. But this brings us to George Floyd and the circumstances and the situations that we find ourselves in today. The Floyd story is fucked up, right? Not that any of them aren't, but this one's fucked up too. So 46-year-old Floyd stops at his regular convenience store to buy cigarettes. Floyd paid with a $20 bill that was flagged as being a possible fake. Right now, a new employee at the store did not know Floyd and he demanded the cigarettes back. And when Floyd refused, he calls the police on Floyd. Now, the reality is that most people that get popped for using counterfeit money had no idea the money was counterfeit to begin with. So this dude's probably rolling up on Floyd, who's like, yo, that shit's counterfeit. And Floyd's like, get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about? Like, no way, dude. You know? Because to him, he didn't know. He didn't know it was counterfeit, if it even was counterfeit to begin with, because wherever this $20 bill went is a mystery. I'm trying to dig more into finding out about that, but for right now, this is what we're going to go with. So Floyd says, fuck you, kick rocks. I didn't use counterfeit money. They go back in, they call the cops. Now cops show up on the scene, and after dragging Floyd out of his car and bringing him over to their car across the street, what we see is what seems to be some kind of a struggle, right? And now after this, that piece of shit Officer Chauvin arrives on the scene and sees Officer Kong and Lane in a struggle with Floyd, right? So Chauvin goes around the police car and rips Floyd out the back of the police car onto the ground. And it's at that point when they begin to kneel on Floyd's neck and back and legs, while George says, I can't breathe, and calls for his mother over and over until finally losing consciousness. Multiple bystanders begged Officer Chauvin to get off of Floyd's neck, to which he ignored with his fucking hand in his pocket, looking so fucking smug like a piece of fucking shit. And even after he is told to get off his neck, you're gonna kill him, he ignores it over and over again, in which in effect is what killed Floyd, right? Even Officer Lane asked to roll George Floyd onto his side, and Chauvin verbally rejects the idea, and for 8 minutes, former Officer Derek Chauvin kept digging his fucking knee into George Floyd's neck until he lost consciousness and died. The videos of the incident went viral, and they sparked outrage, protests, and riots across the fucking country. You know, of which the protest me and my family were a part of. But this time, things were different. This time, the whole world protested with us. Cities all over the country fucking burned. An entire group of people stood up and said, no more. And it has led to a major turning point in this country. Or at least, that's what we're hoping for. There have already been sweeping social and corporate changes, but how far will that go? From monuments to team names, the icons of America's racist past are being torn down one by one. And we can only hope that this continues and that we see real change. But as we learned with Rodney King, the things that we think will change the world oftentimes don't. And it's sad. But there are so many other names here that I didn't mention, strictly due to time concerns, right? And what's worse is that there are so many more of these situations that the world doesn't know about. There are thousands of people that have suffered at the hands of the police that will never get justice, and the world will never know their names. The big question that begs to be asked, though, is how did we get here? How did we end up with such a violent and abusive police force? Depending on who you ask, though, they've always been violent and brutal overseers. But how have the police come to be so aggressive towards black and impoverished people to begin with? Is it really just because of the advent of camera phones, or is it systemic? I mean, I think there truly is no question that the problem lies within the system, but to truly understand this dynamic, we need to look at how the police came to be in the first place, right? To understand our present, we have to look at our roots. So let's take a much needed break and get some levity, and when we come back, we're going to dive into the history of the police and how we got to where we are today. So kick back, relax, and after these messages, we'll be right back.
In these uncertain times of COVID-19, social distancing and protection from dangerous bacteria and viruses are paramount. But it shouldn't stop an election year. Say hello to the politician's pucker stamp. Create a safe and synthetic version of your lips to smooth safely on the campaign trail and still keep those numbers from falling. Hide that underlying racism easily as a compliant yet sympathetic germaphobe while you lock in those votes. Just follow the quick 3-step process to mold your mouth into a virus-free voter machine. Latin, Black, Middle Eastern, or maybe you just hate Asians right now. Whatever demographic you pander to and secretly hate, the politician's pucker stamp will keep your mouth safer than a white policeman's job security. Politician's pucker stamp. Mwah! Taste the racism.
Alright, welcome back, everyone. It is time to dive into this fucking sloppy mess we call a police system. No matter how you try to break things down, the idea of policing in the States has no humble beginnings, really. You know, I truly wish there was a point that we could look at and say the justice system was truly upstanding, but there are so few examples. The United States police force in all of its forms is soaked in blood and corruption. And there's just no hiding that, really. You know, they try to, but I think the more we run from it, you know, the less we have a chance to truly grow from it. The United States has a rich history of bigotry and ignorance, and you don't need to look very far back to find it all. You know, before organized police systems, we had some pretty brutal shit. Justice in the past was often cruel and subjective and fueled by mob justice or religious institutions. There were witch hunts, intercommunal violence, mob lynchings, public lashings, and so much more other fucked up shit that was just commonplace back in the day. Like, check out this scene here.
Very interesting.
My dear woman, whatever are you doing?
Oh, I'm reading the new Descartes.
Excuse me? Gaston, Le Fou, grab the witch. I want her tied to a stake and over a fresh pile of faggots immediately. Oh, I truly am doing God's work. I'm a pious man.
Policing in one form or another has been a part of this country for a long time, even before the United States was officially established as an independent nation. In the mid-1600s, there was the Boston Watch, and there were also informal militias that came together to help enforce order in counties and cities all throughout the colonies, right? Now, this sounds like it was a natural progression to maintain order in a new world, but it is kind of quite the opposite, you know? The Watch was to keep out two things: wild animals and natives, and both were considered to be equal in the Christian man's eyes. And the same is also true for the informal militias that popped up throughout the colonies. They didn't come together because Jason over on Blumpkin Lane was a piece of shit. No, they came together to keep natives at bay as we began to settle on their fucking land. You know? So, to find out the truth about the origins of policing in America, you really need to look no further than Massachusetts. The first form of policing took form in the Boston Watch in 1631. The Boston Watch was the first of its kind in the colonies and would form the basis of all other watches created after that. The Boston Watch was tasked with patrolling and watching over the strip of land from Roxbury to Boston, and that's because tensions were wicked high between settlers and natives. And this is evidenced by the Pequot War that happened just 5 years after the creation of the watch. In 1636, the Pequot War exploded between the New England settlers and the Narragansett and the Mohegan tribes, right? When the Boston Watch was first created, there were only 175 residents, and settler John Winthrop wrote in his journal, "We began a corps of guard upon the neck between Roxbury and Boston, whereupon should always be resident an officer and 6 men. It was agreed that if any person fire off a piece after the watch is set, he shall be fined 40 shillings or be whipped." By 1636, the population had grown to about 400, and that caused the Boston Watch to grow in numbers, patrolling more and more lands. A night watch is very much like what you saw in Game of Thrones. You know, it was typically thugs or natives or slaves that were charged with hunting down and stopping their own as punishment for crimes, or simply because they were the same race. Also, night watches were notoriously corrupt because of this dynamic, a problem that would seem to stick regardless of what the overseeing force was called. Now, while things may have started out as a patrol against assholes, animals, and natives up north, things took a very different turn down south. While Plymouth was settled in 1620, it was not the first colony. The first colony was Jamestown, Virginia, and it was founded in 1607, 13 years before Plymouth, Massachusetts. And it was also the first place to introduce slave labor to the colonies in 1619, 1 year before Massachusetts. However, the first slaves in Massachusetts came after the Pequot War that we just mentioned, right? Several of the captured Native Americans were traded in the West Indies in exchange for slaves in 1638. Now, the role of slaves was very fucking different in the North as opposed to the South, too. In New England, it was common for enslaved people to learn specialized skills and trades due to our more varied economy. Ministers, doctors, merchants, they all used slave labor to work alongside them as well as to run their households. In the South, slaves were strictly forced into heavy or farm labor, except for specific, occasions. And there were house Negroes, but it was very different down South than it was up North, Now, as far as policing is concerned, in colonial America, policing was considered a local responsibility, and multiple colonies established a system of night watches to guard cities against fire, crime, disorder, and all that other shit, right? And it's important to remember here that not everyone that came to the New World was some morally upright person, nor were they pious individuals such as the fucking Puritans. Many of them were castaways from British society, exiles, and so on and so forth. The entire state of Georgia was criminals, for example. You know what I mean? Granted, that colony wasn't started until afterwards, but still, there was basically all the criminals. They were like, fuck, send them over there, just like they did to Australia. It was like all these bad people, degenerates, or people that they deemed unfit for their society and fucking sent them to this other place. And ironically enough, the similarities between the two police forces and night watches and how they developed are strikingly similar between America and Australia. That's one that I would encourage you guys to look up because there's just too much to go into there to make it relevant to this episode, aside from just the similarities on how they came up. And they basically came up, as I just said to you before, it was just thugs and aboriginals and shit like that, and they were tasked with hunting down their own. And, fucking shady type of tactics, and that is something that never left. It's something that has been forever, it was just adopted and put into our system. But let's keep it going, right? So on top of the explorers and the adventurers or people escaping religious persecution, there were transgressors, thugs, and thieves. The expansion of the colonies was swift, and as they grew, so too did the need for governance. And as the colonies in the South grew, so too did their dependence on slave labor. Now, night watch and town watch groups were established in the northern and southern colonies to ward off wrongdoers and the ones that they called savages from the inception of the colonies themselves, right? Policing was not specific to the South at all, and neither were town watch duties in terms of capturing runaway slaves and shit in the North, The thing that made the South differ was the political and economical climate of the time. The Carolinas had an issue with the French, with pirates from the Caribbean, with the Spanish from fucking Florida. Therefore, the colony's defenses grew much differently than they did up north. They didn't have such large workforces, nor did they have to contend with pirates and multiple armies from different nations, nor did they even have to contend with uprisings. Well, in terms of uprisings, the North did have its share, but in light of the South's history, they were nowhere near as much of an issue, especially when you consider the ideological differences in how slaves were used between the two parts of the country. Now, it's at this point that policing diverges down two separate paths, but both with the same principle, which is to maintain the labor force and keep them docile. Up north, things went differently, with far fewer plantations, so the watchman's main goal was to suppress the red man, chase the black man if needed, and then beat the white man into submission. Whereas down south, the watch was still all those things, but they also had much larger numbers of slaves to maintain and control. Also, due to the aforementioned constant political and military conflict, the Southern Watch counterparts developed into paramilitary units. So, between 1695 and 1696, a series of legislatures were passed that broke off a part of the Watch that created an urban militia patrol that was due to fear of a French invasion, right? So at this point, this urban militia patrol that was created had nothing to do with slaves yet. It was because of the fear of the French and other armies, you know what I mean? But it's going to become. The fear of a French invasion had been broiling for like fucking 9 years until the end of King William's War in 1697. So you can see how all this led to a much different approach in the ways the watch would develop down south. By the time 1708 rolls around, the slaves in Charleston, South Carolina had grown to outnumber the European settlers in the area. And slaves in South Carolina, as well as in many other areas, did not all live on the plantations. Many of them lived in boroughs within the cities, and because of their large numbers in South Carolina, their fears quickly grew in regards to an uprising, and this gave birth to the active 24/7 slave patrols. And this was also, they didn't have unfounded fears of uprisings. It was very real to them that these people could very much rise up and slaughter all of them. And we're going to get into a few of these instances throughout this series, I guess. So now I think there's a couple of important things to mention here before we go any further, right? And the first of which is that lifelong bondage was not always a thing in the colonies, okay? The level of bondage levied on non-Christian people evolved over a time due to retaliation and competition from freed slaves, okay? So it was because freed slaves fucking were rising up against people, and then it was because these freed slaves, white and black, indentured servants, because they weren't slaves then, they were just indentured servants. So all these white and black indentured servants were rising up, or they were, in direct competition with the plantation owners and the old slave owners. And they didn't like that shit at fucking all. The second thing that I think bears mentioning here is that up until this time period, the settlers did not distinctly see themselves as white, and they didn't see Africans as blacks or natives as reds. Early settlers saw themselves as European or Christians, and everything else was simply non-Christian and savage. It was not black and white. It was Christian and non-Christian. That was it. And I think that's a huge thing we fucking totally miss during this moment, is that we tend to think that there was just always this white-black persona, and it wasn't at all. It was something that was fucking, built into the colonies by the British, not by America, but by the British. And we're going to get into all this, but let's keep it rolling, right? So, it isn't until 1705 when Virginia declared all servants imported and brought into this country who were not Christians in their native country shall be slaves. Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves shall be held to be real estate. And that's what basically all that legislative shit did. Was it turned anybody that was black, brown, red, light skin, it turned all of them into lifelong slaves. Or lifelong, not even slaves necessarily, but property. It turned them into things in the eyes of the people. And I think that's a very important thing to understand, is that we never thought that way. Like we say as children too, right? Like children are taught to be racist. You know what I'm saying? We had to be taught to be racist, and it took a little while to get it to stick, and it did stick clearly, right? But basically what those laws did was, what those laws meant at the end of the day was that anybody that was white or Christian could never be a slave, and all non-Christians, i.e. black, brown, or red people, were nothing more than property. You know what I mean? And so this was a major shift in ideology. Prior to that piece of legislature, slaves were more like indentured servants and could earn their freedom as well as have more time tacked on for bad behavior and shit like that, and it was only after this that bondage became lifelong and colonists truly began to see themselves not as European settlers or Christians, but as white people, and began to see slaves as black people. For at that moment, it was signed into law that the distinct color of our skin would dictate how we viewed others all the way up to this very day. Now, this dynamic of manufactured racism is one that we're going to explore moving forward, but let's get back on track, right? Slave patrols in South Carolina are what are most commonly looked at as the foundations of modern police. And while it is a part of it, it is not the truth. Now, while yes, the tactics used by the slave patrols bear a striking resemblance and are pretty much the same thing that cops use in the modern day, it's not the origins of policing in and of itself as many would like you to believe. But with that being said, as time rolled on and the South's dependency on slave labor grew and the more slaves tried to escape, the more the profession of bounty hunting grew, which is also something that was confused with slave patrols and their role in the development of the American police force. This is not as cut and dry as everyone would like you to assume. And this made it very hard to write, and I feel like it's kind of like a civic duty in a sense to shed more light onto the topic because, there needs to be some more attention brought to the fact that, during this time period, there was large-scale manufactured racism all throughout the colonies. You know, they were molding us to be racist during this time. We were not just racist. It wasn't just like that. And it's something that is always missed. And it pisses me off because I feel like it just makes us not understand each other more. It makes us not like each other more because we're not taught that there was a time that, like, we tried to change things together, but you know, fucking the system beat everybody, basically. But we're gonna get into that, so let's continue. You know, whether racism came from legislation or religious institutions, the mindset was given, not gained, you know? And the fact that racism was institutionalized and propagated strictly for monetary gain is something that I also think that we really need to understand. You know, and it bears mentioning that the first fucking slave revolt happened in Gloucester, Virginia in 1663, and it included white and black indentured servants. And it's another piece that is oftentimes convoluted in terms of general knowledge. You know what I mean? While the first slave laws were passed in Massachusetts in 1641, that does not mean that everybody involved in this revolt was a slave. A huge part of the story that I think is overlooked is that it was the first fucking rebellion and that this was the end of the mixing of races in relation to servitude. When the races came together against oppression, it proved to be absolutely too volatile of a mixture for the English ruling class to defend against. And this was also a driving factor in creating more and more legislation to classify people of color as less than. And furthermore, they incentivized white people or European settlers to participate in the whole thing. You know, if a white caught a slave, which was undoubtedly going to be black or red, they would be highly rewarded. And all of this type of behavior was highly rewarded by the system, by the ruling class. Yes, fuck those people. Yes, spit on them. Oh, fucking, yeah, oh, hang them up in the tree. Good job, you little fucking poor piece of shit. Here's a sack full of coins, you know, from your fucking lord. Good job. You know, fucking, this is exactly what we want you idiots to fucking do. And that's what we did. We did what they wanted us to do, and we got paid for it, handsomely in some cases. And in the South, it became a huge part of who they were. You know what I mean? They wanted us to hate them, and so they would pay us a bunch of fucking money to hate the people that they wanted us to hate. Or they would put bounties up, and they would, you know, you'd go to the board, and like that's how a lot of this shit started. It was from the ruling class paying us to hate people, and it created a giant fucking mess when you think about it, right? It really, really did, you know, but slavery didn't create racism. Economics created racism. As the economy grew, the idea of white supremacy grew with it, you know? And now keep in mind that early settlers, again, they were not a fucking smart bunch by any stretch of the imagination. Like, we're lucky if they could read and write, and if any of those motherfuckers even knew math outside of their fucking 20 digits. You know what I'm saying? Like, surely, you know, we developed and acquired great minds in the New World over time, but the larger part of the populace was dumber than a sack of fucking bricks. You know, and that means it was pretty easy to make stupid fucking people think that they were better than other people. That, in many cases, were from a much higher standing or education level than the commonplace settler. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of these people that came from Africa were decorated people. They were just on the wrong side of a battle, and they got captured and sold. And this is what led to most of the early revolts in the English colonies, which led to the creation of most of the laws against the slaves. You know, for instance, many of these slaves who were these fucking decorated soldiers and warriors in Africa before being captured and shit like that, they're over here and now they're organizing and they're getting shit popping. You know what I'm saying? And these dudes are savage, you know what I mean? And as we said before too, as the numbers grew, the rebellions continued. You know, whites grew more and more fearful of the slaves because of that, you know, and they kept tightening their grip and enforcing more and more brutal means to keep the slaves in line. And all this did was create a state of war in the everyday lives of the colonists. And I fail to see how this has stopped to this very fucking day. That's the fucking 400-year war right here. We're still fucking fighting it. We're fighting like this battle of the minds. And it all started right here. Every day you were at war with the people that didn't look like you, you know, and this led to some serious fucking rebellions, you know, and like we went over, many of the slaves were veterans, you know, and we can look to the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, you know, remember how those fucking entitled pieces of shit were in such fear of an uprising? Well, check this shit out, right? In 1739, a slave named Cato organized 20 other ex-Congolese soldiers and began purging the fucking city, dude. They broke into a store and fucking stole guns and blades and all that shit, and then they savagely fucking killed about 23 people, and they amassed a group of about 100 slaves and white men. This was a brutal thing. And this was like not just slaves. This was slaves and fucking, people sans melanin. This was a group of people and it was savage, and we fucking tore through the town and we killed fucking masters, we killed overseers, and we fucking took everybody that got in our way before we tried to make a run for Spanish-controlled Florida. Charleston set out in armed pursuit, and by the following day, just about everybody and their accomplices were all put to death. And again, this led to massive changes being put into place to further oppress slaves and further enforce white supremacy. Now, the thing that I find interesting is public opinion of watchmen and slave patrols do not differ very much nowadays as opposed to how people viewed them back in the day. The problems that plagued them are the same that plague our police forces today, such as corruption, the use of substances while working, being complicit in crimes, being part of the KKK, and over abuse of power and no-knock searches due to either their incompetence or abuse of power. People tended to not have much respect for slave patrols or watchmen whatsoever, Now, I hope you've been paying attention so far too, because we're not even in America yet. All this division was created by the British well before the United States was even ever a thought. And I think it's important to remember that, because as far as slavery and nations are concerned, the people of this country did away with slavery insanely quickly when you think about it. America, out of all countries, has played the smallest role in slavery and did away with it quicker than any other nation ever has. And I don't think that we ever talk about that. Some more history you need to learn is that while the transatlantic slave trade existed and hundreds of thousands of slaves were sold over that 400-year period, only 2 to 4% of them ever landed in the colonies directly, English or otherwise. But let's take a look at some of those numbers in terms of the years. The transatlantic slave trade existed for 400 years, and the first slaves were brought to the English colonies in 1619. And then slavery is abolished in America in 1875. So that means out of 400 years of the Middle Passage where slaves were taken from Africa, slavery was only present in America for 256 of those years. And even that isn't true, because slavery was a common practice across the world. And the same is true for the Native Americans. Just like the African people had a habit of subjecting their own people, so too didn't the Native Americans. Native Americans of this land practiced slavery well before European intervention. And as far as America is concerned, slavery only lasted for 99 years before being abolished in 1875. And I know I say only 99 years, you know what I'm saying? But as far as things go, when you look at how quickly things changed, we had just only in a couple of generations, people started thinking about equality in a way that led them to do away with slavery, and well, in the form of plantations anyway, but we're going to get into that later, because while some things changed, more things stayed the same. The thing that I didn't know, honestly, when I was reading about the transatlantic slave trade is, how small of a part the colonies actually played in that whole thing. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to take away anybody's guilt or anything. I thought like all those slaves came here. I thought like that 400 years was just fucking a direct, pipeline of slaves coming right to America. And it wasn't. Or at least it doesn't seem like it was. I might be wrong. Maybe I read the wrong, few pages of information. I tried to cross-reference my shit. But, so far it doesn't look like those numbers match with what my own imagination thought. I just thought it was horrible. Not to say that it wasn't horrible, but I thought it was just all of it was coming to America, but it wasn't, But a lot of slaves that went through the Middle Passage did end up making it to America because of us trading slaves that we caught, Mexicans and natives and all that shit. We would trade them with, other nations in the Caribbean and shit, and we would, trade off slaves. We did away with slavery, but it was only in the form of plantations, and we're going to get into that as we move forward, and you're going to see how the plantations didn't really go away. But again, let's get back to where we are, right? So in the United States, right, the first officially organized police force was like the official organized police force was established in Boston again in 1838. New York followed suit 6 years later, and then Philadelphia in 1854. And even then, the police were not respected by the fucking community, because once again, corruption was just as rampant as it was when they were plain old watchmen. Right from their conception, the police were marketed as protecting society from criminals, thugs, and natives and Negroes. But the reality of it is that they were just fucking strongmen for all these bougie bastards to force out any disorder within the working class, you know? And if you want to wield power, you will always need an official group to exact that force. And the American police have always been that force, as they've been the ones entirely guided by capital interests, not state interests. The very origins of the organized police were to control and mold the labor force into submission. So anytime a labor union protest or civil rights issue broke out, the police were the ones that were tasked with removing the problem. Remember before when I told you about how the policing took two different paths, you know, and it diverged, you know, and I think we can clearly see now how and why the North and the South evolved differently. But now this is where those two paths are going to begin to converge again. Another age-old ism, aside from racism, is classism, both of which were literally institutionalized during English rule, and class conflict was rampant in the 19th century America. You know, places like Chi-Town went through major fucking strikes and riots between 1850 and 1900. You know, and each time the police met the strikers with extreme violence, strike breakers were fucking fierce. The tactics that the police would use to break up labor unions and civil unrest was exactly how the paddy rollers would deal with people of color in slave towns, you know, mixed with subversive night watch tactics. It was the first time both modes of policing came together, which formed the basis of every police force to this day, you know, and people tend to cite the paddy rollers or slave patrols as the precursor to the modern police force, but there is a distinct difference in what one does and the tactics in which one does such a thing. You know, slave patrol tactics were incorporated into the police playbook. They did not create the playbook. Forcing working class groups of people into submission to comply with groupthink was always the basis for policing. Slavery in America happened to add a much more fucking aggressive and racist dynamic to the mix. You know, however, they did grow together, just in different fashions. You know what I mean? And while all this is going on, you know, all this civil unrest is brewing in this newly formed country. You know what I mean? Slaves are becoming more educated, revolts continue to happen, and people were awakening to the pain and suffering being caused by slavery. You know, you can even go as far to say as the human consciousness was evolving at that point as the entire world was changing around us. The America's ability to produce large volumes of products changed the entire world economy, and all because of slavery. You know, American slavery and the crops it produced are what helped spawn the Industrial Revolution. You know, during the Industrial Revolution, the manufacturing of goods went from small shops to large factories overnight. And with that, large numbers of people flocked to cities in search of work. You know, and this is what led to the creation of the police over the former night and town watches. You know, because especially in places like Boston, where there was a massive influx and you just had all these different night watch forces going on, and it was fucking extremely corrupt. And they were like, well, hey guys, let's just be wicked corrupt together, all right? And everybody was like, yeah, fucking wicked pisser idea, bro. And boom, we ended up with the mass state police. You know, but this is what led to the creation of the police over the former night and town watches, right? You know, and as commerce grew, widespread education began to take place in most states as well, you know, and with that, the people began to see the religious lie of servitude and decided to abolish slavery, you know, and while white supremacy had already been bred into the colonies, it didn't have a face until we started getting funny with people's money, you know? Remember how we were talking about how we were rewarding people for returning slaves and shit, you know? Well, that's a huge part of this. People down south found an entire identity within rearing and keeping slaves for financial gain. An antebellum plantation owner without slaves was like a Wild West cowboy without a horse, you know? If you take away my horses, just about every part of the Wild West cowboy image just gonna fall apart now, don't it? If you take away all the horses, just about every part of the Wild West cowboy image and way of life falls apart and turns into some fucking Monty Python Holy Grail version of cowboys and Indians. And the same is true with the antebellum South. Not the Monty Python part, but the other part. The Civil War was way more than just an attack on the Southern economic institutions. It was an attack on the entire Southern way of life altogether. You know, the end of slavery in America is what brought the true rise of white supremacy, you know? And by the time the Civil War rolled around, like almost every watch was militarized, and militias and paramilitary groups were fucking everywhere, especially in the South, as we talked about before, you know? And the North was like fucking, hey guys, we came up with this wicked piss idea about freeing the slaves. The fuck you just say to me? Brenda, get my good sheets from the guest room. Do you want the white ones? God damn it, Brenda, you know I do. And with that, we get the KKK, which was founded in 1866 as like some secret society shit, you know, and it was in direct opposition to the North's plans for restructuring. And we're going to learn all about these guys when we kick off part 2. You know, probably the most interesting part of the Klan that I came across was that there was an attempt to disband them a few years after the Klan started. The first Grand Wizard and founder, General Nathan Bedford Forrest, started the KKK as some secret fucking social club based on maintaining the South's way of life. However, though, things quickly turned violent, and this is not what Forrest supposedly had in mind, you know, and he made an attempt to shut down the KKK, but it had already spread way too far throughout the South, you know, and Forrest quickly lost control, and the Klan ends up rising to become this terrorist hate group that we know today, you know? And I think it's pretty interesting to see that even the original founder of the fucking Klan was like, Jesus Christ! Guys, what the fuck? God damn it, Jimmy Lee Bob alone! Oh, fuck, I am going to hell for this shit. Pretty crazy, right? You know, at the end of the day, though, what did we learn? You know, for one, off the jump, we learned that Hollywood does its best to show the police as the good guys, even with the advent of more and more movies being based on more realistic, you know, premises. We also learned that the whole Rodney King incident and the shocking LA uprising, while powerful, failed to create any meaningful impact. If anything, things seem to have gotten worse. Another thing that we learned is that racism was manufactured in this country, and while it only took 99 years for Americans to do away with slavery, like we said before, the racism stuck. I think another big thing to take away here is that even from the very beginning of this country, the people were prone to rising up against oppression. You know, and every time we fought together, it was fucking devastating. Whether it was an uprising, a revolution, or a fucking civil war. The only reason we've gotten this far as a country, as a nation, is because we fought together. And it would stand to reason that if we want to get any further, we're gonna have to come together one more fucking time. And we're gonna have to stay together. Another really big key component we need to understand going forward is that with police in all forms past and present, they are only an arm of the bourgeois. You know, and they exist to preserve and expand free market capitalism. The police are really nothing more than a gang that the state uses to legitimize their violence, to protect property and serve property owners. Policing itself was meant to stifle the working class and protect private property, and whether that was a plantation or a motherfucking factory, it didn't matter. All of it was the same. Whether it was blacks or natives or lower class, the police tended to behave the same, albeit to varying degrees as well. And as we progressed, the main role of the police was to fuck with anyone that brought up civil liberties or workers' rights, you know? In part 2, we're gonna see how true racism bred by the KKK became synonymous with the military, police, and government. And also, we're gonna be going over the Jim Crow laws and the civil rights movement all the way up to today. You know, so make sure you tune in for the second half. There's going to be a lot more. Like, there's so much more that we haven't even gotten into. And there's so much that I wasn't even really able to get into just in this section. In part 2, where we start off, we're going to jump right into the KKK. We're going to learn all about them. We're going to learn a little more about Nathan Bedford Forrest and some of the other people and some of the other things that were involved. And so much more. Looking at the true history of all this shit and looking how we ended up here. You know, like, we can't unlegislate hate. You know, we have to just stop with the shit. I think that's like the fucked up part about America too, is that people want to come here so they can be better than other people. And they come here and what do? So many people from other races come here and they're like, oh, fuck you. And they start being very, you know, hoity-toity. And hey, good for them. A lot of them, you know, rose the fuck up out of the mud or sand or dirt or wherever they came from. And then they come to this country and they make a life for themselves, a good life for themselves. But it seems like everybody that comes here, they come here and they love that supremacy, you know, and it's not just white people. You know, everybody comes here and they just eat that shit up. Discrimination, you know. And that was one of the biggest shocks when I moved out to LA back in the day. Coming from Massachusetts, coming from, you know, melting pot areas and always being up in Boston and around the colleges and all those areas and just always Asian, black, fucking Puerto Rican, you know, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, French, fucking Italian, Russians, like you name it, dude, they're all out here, you know, and was around them all the time. And then we move out to California and we're thinking it's going to be like the epitome of a melting pot. And they're like, don't you fucking go into Little Armenia. You know, you can't be there. Like, we had one of our friends, we lived in Canoga Park for a while, and we were friends with the only black girl that lived in the area. and they didn't get along. They were these shootings that happened where Mexicans and blacks shot back at each other, and two little girls got killed in the process, and it created a crazy bit of tension. And it was like one day at like 2 a.m, fucking somebody's banging on our door, boom, 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 scream and let him in, let me in, and it was homegirl's boyfriend. It was a black dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were like hiding in the bushes and shit, and fucking thank God we have like one of those gated locked fucking fences, and he was able to like slam the thing, but they were jumping it, fucking chasing him down, bro. Crazy shit. We were shocked to see how segregated and racist LA is, and to see how much of a big issue it still is. It makes the LA uprising make a lot more sense to me, afterwards, looking back at shit, because it's fucking real. But that's always something that I thought was strange. There's this anger about white supremacy and all these things and that, but it's like everybody that seems to come here and they want that I'm better than you feeling. They want that, like, get the fuck out of here, you lowly piece of shit. And they all do it to whoever they want. Like, call a fucking Korean person Chinese, you know what I mean? Or call a Mexican or Puerto Rican. Bro, my God, dude, like, fucking crazy shit. Like, they'll start saying some horrible shit about people. Openly. Like, and I guess like white people do that shit too, but I've never really been around people that like talk like that, and maybe that's just a North thing. I don't know. Like I said before, coming from a blended community, like granted, I've come across people in my life that got some mouse on them, white and black, because I have friends of all colors, dude, and I've heard both parties say some just foul shit, and then, have black friends saying some wild shit and then forget, like, I'm there, and then look at me, and then I'm like, oh, like, yeah, nah, I get it, like, like, I understand. Like, I get it, can't say that I don't, but with that, let's end part 1. Let's continue on. Let's get to the giveaway. Thank you so much for hanging in all the way up to this point. I hope up to this point has been enjoyable for you so far. I hope part 1 of the Night Watch is accurate and I haven't pissed people off. I don't know. Like, I was very nervous about this whole topic to begin with, because I knew I was going to say some kind of conflicting things. But whatever, it is what it is. I mean no malice to anybody. So listen. All you need to do is to share the show on your favorite platform, and tag me in the posts. Simple, right? You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Want Some Spook. You can like the page on Facebook at You Want Some Spook with a lowercase u at the beginning. And on Instagram at _Scary Shadows. And if we get some good shares, I'll try to pick a winner as soon as possible. The lucky winner will receive a 90 milligram tin of the Fruity Pebble Medibuds from Metabuds from Dazed and Infused Baking Company. My most fucking favoriteest edible bakery ever. So make sure you share the show, please. Let's get the word out about these guys, because they're fucking awesome, and they were so nice as to just offer up their services for the show, and so I fucking fully support them and all that they do. And I need these things out of my hands before I eat these motherfuckers. I gotta be honest with you, I love the Metabuds. The Metabuds are one of my favorite fucking things, And sadly, youngins, this one is not for you. For my 21 plus people though, head over to @DazedTreats and give them a follow and show them some love for sponsoring this giveaway. They are some of the nicest people you're ever going to meet, and they're following their passion. So if you're in the area, I highly suggest that you put in an order and prepare to be dazed. But that does it for today. I can't wait to see you guys for the next episode. It promises to be full of a lot more shit that is gonna probably get me to be very pissed off, and I'm gonna have to reel myself back in, because a lot of this shit just fucking fires me up. But yeah, as usual, I love you guys. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all safe, and make sure you share the show. I want these things out of my hands, so I need to know who I'm going to mail them to. So fucking share the show, like the show, love the show, chew the fish, eat the fish, love the fish. And this has been part 1 of the Night Watch, a history of policing in America. And as usual, I can't wait to see you guys next time. This has been another episode of Bright Lights and Scary Shadows.